All right, Senator Daines, we're here at your home in Montana. Thank you for having us here. Really important election. First off, this view is just absolutely amazing. They call it Big Sky Country for a reason, huh?
Well, I've always said the best decision I ever made in my life was when I picked my great-great-grandma. She came out to Montana homestead a long time ago. So I'm so grateful for that, to get to call Montana home.
We have a lot of very important things to talk about in this election, but I want to start with one of the gravest issues facing the country. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer showed us, I guess, the wrong way to grill cheeseburgers. What are your thoughts? Are Senate Republicans prepared to grill cheeseburgers the proper way?
Well, just a pro tip for Chuck, don't put a slice of cheese on a raw patty that probably was frozen as well. Cook it for a while, Chuck. Wait till the end, and then put that slice of cheese on it. But I was glad to see at least he made a try.
At least he made a try. Okay, so Senator, a lot of big important stuff we got to talk about here. We got a really historic election here, just a few months away. Obviously, Republicans have a shot at retaking the White House, retaking the U.S. Senate, holding their House majority. Lay out the stakes for us. What's at stake in this election?
Well, I don't think there's been a more consequential election, certainly in my lifetime, as what's coming up in November of 2024. I think the House right now is a jump ball. They've got a little tougher hill to climb to not only retain the majority, but also expand it. We're looking at the presidency right now. I think that race is going to tighten up. I hope it's a landslide for Trump. But if you look at 16 and 20, it came down to less than 100,000 votes either way that decided that race. So you come back to the United States Senate, that I think is the firewall. As I told President Trump when I first met with him, right after I took the job as chairman, this was early 2023, I said, Mr. President, the most important thing we can do for you is to give you a Republican Senate majority. The very first phone call you will make after you're elected is to the Senate Majority Leader. It better be a Republican and not Chuck Schumer, because we're in the personnel business. Our founding fathers gave us the advising consent responsibility for every nominee in the Trump administration, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Treasury, Director of the CIA. That will go right through the U.S. Senate, not to mention the Supreme Court. A lot at stake, and that's why the Senate is so important here in 2024.
So you're the chairman, obviously, of the NRSC. That's the party committee charged with retaking the majority for the Republicans in the Senate. Lay out the strategy for us. How do you do it? We're at 49-51 right now. How do we get to 51 or more for the Republicans?
Well, the margins really have never been narrower in terms of numeric. We were a 50-50 Senate last Congress. We're 49-51 in this Congress. But the ideological divide between Republicans and Democrats has just never been larger. I mean, Kamala Harris has broken more ties as vice president than any vice president in our nation's history. We've had 47 vice presidents. She's number one. She's broken some major consequential type ties where, for example, the $1.9 trillion stimulus package, borrowing all this money, launching it in the economy, borrowed money that was inflationary. You look at the Inflation Reduction Act, that was an incredibly terrible piece of legislation passed on a tie-breaking vote by Kamala Harris. So you take a look at what's up right now in the Senate. We've got to find candidates working with President Trump that can win not only primary elections, but general elections. Look, winners make policy, losers go home. The consequences of losing right now are profound, because if we don't take back the majority and the Democrats are in charge, they will blow up the filibuster. That means D.C. and Puerto Rico are now states. That means 4 Democrat senators in perpetuity. They will also move the Supreme Court from 9 to 13 justices. They'll pack the court. And last, they will pass one of their favorite bills, the left, and that's the federal takeover of all the elections. Our founding fathers feared concentration of power. That's why you have the separation of powers, both in terms of the 3 branches of government, but the separation of powers between the federal government and the states, the principles of federalism. This bill would remove any voter ID laws that states have passed. It would be all mail-in ballots. It would not have cutoffs on Tuesday night, on election night at 8 p.m., have a long tail of maybe 2 or 3 weeks to get all the ballots in. You can see we lose complete control of elections. The left does irreparable harm to this country with a power grab that will make it very difficult to ever get a center-right government elected in Washington again.
The only thing standing between them, where they've been in the majority for the last two Congresses, the 50-50 Senate you talked about there, where Kamala was the tiebreaker for the majority, and this Congress where it's 51-49, the only thing standing in the way of them doing all of those things you just talked about there are two retiring supposedly independent senators who have left the Democrat Party but still caucus with the Democrats. They're both leaving this cycle. So if they hold the majority, they're going to do all this stuff.
So they tried what they call nuke the filibuster in the last Congress. But Sinema and Manchin were the only two that stood with us, and both have announced their retirement. So there are no more Democrats that are going to stand to protect the filibuster, which means it's a simple 50 vote plus one threshold to put these radical changes in our laws, including, imagine the Second Amendment, the gun-grabbing legislation they would pass with just 51 votes. And by the way, if you don't believe me, go read what Adam Schiff has written. I'm sad to report that Adam Schiff is probably going to be the next U.S. Senator from California. He telegraphed this in writing earlier this year. So that's their strategy. We cannot let them succeed, and that's why we have got to get at least 51 Republicans in the United States Senate in January of 25.
Before we get into the specific races, one of those supposedly, he likes to claim he's a moderate, Democrats from the U.S. Senate is right here in Montana, Jon Tester. He won't stand there with us and stop the filibuster from breaking? Like he's with them too, the radicals?
He already voted with them the last time this came to the floor of the U.S. Senate. And we've never seen so much money poured into the state of Montana from the left as what's going on right now in this Montana Senate race. Why? Montana is a state that Trump is going to win by 20 points. Montana is a state where every statewide official is now a Republican except for one, and that's Jon Tester. So he is running, trying to look like he's half Republican, working with President Trump on the border, supporting President Trump, supporting Republican policies. It's nonsense. Look, Jon Tester voted to impeach President Trump twice. Jon Tester voted against every one of President Trump's Supreme Court nominations. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. Jon Tester voted against the Trump tax cuts of 17. Jon Tester is rated F by the NRA. Tim Sheehy, the Republican, is rated A. So on every consequential vote, when President Trump was in office, he voted with Chuck Schumer and the left. Now that Biden's in office, 95% of Jon Tester's votes have been with Joe Biden. So there is a major difference between what Jon is projecting who he is in his commercials, his radio ads, and how he votes. And at the end of the day, it's about how you vote back in Washington.
Right. I have a bunch of follow-up questions about Jon Tester, but I want to kind of rewind a little bit here. Obviously, as you guys are setting out to retake the Senate majority, you've had a really close relationship for years with President Trump, and I know you've considered him a partner as you guys have set out to do this. You've worked with him very closely. We saw him at the NRSC very recently, just a few weeks ago, where you and several other Senate Republicans, even some of his critics, came and heard his message there. Talk to us about that meeting, what that was like. What was it like in that room with President Trump?
Well, look, first of all, my relationship goes back to right after he was elected. Donald Trump Jr. came out here to Montana. We went and hunted elk together and killed a couple of elk together. We were at hunting camp together with Don's sweet little boy. Now he's nearly a grown man. But we had the best time. And the 4 best years I've had in the U.S. Senate were when President Trump was in office. Think about what we got to do. Moving the ball down the field in a significant way, changing the Supreme Court, cutting taxes, passing the greatest conservation win, by the way, in 50 years was done by President Trump, the Great America Outdoors Act.
What did that bill do? Talk to us
so
about
what
the
it
Great
did is
American
it took
Outdoors
care of all the backlog maintenance in our national parks. A treasure, by the way, Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, one of his visionary ideas, it was started by Republicans. It's only fitting that Republicans invested in our national parks to make sure we had the infrastructure that was lagging, that was 30, 40, 50 years old. President Trump signed that. So what a great accomplishment for the conservation movement under President Trump, not to mention the Abraham Accords and the stability we had in the world, the secure southern border. I mean, what a difference from where we're at right now. But when President Trump came to Washington and met with us at the NRSC building, I was sitting right there on his elbow. In fact, we had, it was J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio. Mitch McConnell was right there, Tim Scott, John Barrasso. And I will tell you something. President Trump gave an hour-long talk and back and forth discussion and questions that just was fantastic. Really a lot of unity. As we talked about, we've got to come together here. I mean, President Trump and Leader McConnell shaking hands.
It was a powerful moment.
Really exchanging powerful, kind words with one another. And then after the meeting, Leader McConnell went out publicly and said great things about President Trump. That's what's needed. As Tim Scott once said, the path to socialism runs through a divided Republican Party. And this is why when I started working with President Trump on the Senate map, when I went down to Mar-a-Lago and met with him early on in my leadership assignment here, we talked about that. I said, Mr. President, we need to fly in tight formation, just like the Thunderbirds, because if we aren't working together, the country is at a loss. So let's work together, and I speak to the president frequently. We text frequently. We're working together on these important Senate races. And here we are now, 4 months away from the biggest election, and literally we are aligned up and down the top 10 races in the country. President Trump and I are aligned.
So about that, Senator, about this relationship with President Trump and these endorsements, President Trump has obviously endorsed many of the candidates early in their primaries, important endorsements, Bernie Moreno, Tim Sheehy here in Montana, Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania. I mean, we've seen across the board this alignment. It's almost a Trump-Daines alliance, if you will. Talk to us about that and the importance of this, and the how this was no accident how this map came together.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's been very intentional. So one of our strategies, looking at what happened in the last cycle in 22, where instead of gaining Senate seats in the 22 election, we actually went in reverse and lost a Senate seat. With so much at stake, one of our key strategies was finding candidates that could win not just primaries but general elections. And really, as President Trump and I discussed, you've got to have the MAGA side of the party behind our candidates. We've got to expand that to more broadly across the Republican base. But importantly, you've got to have independent voters. I think about what Ronald Reagan did once upon a time. He was the first president I got to vote for in 1980 as a freshman at Montana State University. So President Trump and I had that conversation early, before anybody was hardly endorsing President Trump. And I endorsed President Trump early in my leadership at the NRSC. First, because I thought he'd be the best president. But second, very important to be working together with this great president. And so as we went through these races, starting with West Virginia, we recruited Governor Jim Justice. I worked with President Trump to endorse Governor Justice. He was beating Joe Manchin by 20 points in a poll. And I told President Trump, I says, you endorse Jim Justice, we likely will see Joe Manchin drop out of the race. He will retire. It's exactly what happened. The president called me in September. He says, Steve, I've got good news for you. I says, what's that, Mr. President? He says, I'm endorsing Governor Jim Justice in West Virginia. He calls him Big Jim. I said, that's fantastic news. And as soon as that endorsement news went out, Manchin, 2 weeks later, announced his retirement. So that is a pickup seat for the Republicans. Very important, because that takes us from 49-51 to 50-50. Without spending any money in West Virginia, we just picked up a U.S. Senate race. Otherwise, had Manchin stayed in that race, it might have been a $50 million, maybe $100 million race.
Right, and so you're not worried about West Virginia here at this point.
I'm not.
Yeah,
no, I'm
Democrats aren't even going to really feel the serious.
I'm a conservative forecaster, but look, that race is over. Decision Desk has called West Virginia. We're going to win West Virginia. That takes us to 50-50, and then we look at the 8 remaining battleground states. We need to win 1 to get the majority back, and it starts right here in Montana. Right.
Okay. So now, before we get to that point, though, we've got 2 places we got to play a little bit of defense, and they are red states, right? Florida and Texas, right? Like so Ted Cruz in Texas and Rick Scott in Florida, they got to both win their races. We've seen in both cases their Democrat opponents, Colin Allred in Texas and Debbie McCarcel-Powell in Florida, they try to act like they're moderates, right? Like, and this is a theme we see across the board where they're trying to separate themselves from Biden. And I saw this recently with Allred. He's going out there saying, it's called out Biden on the border. And but if you go back and look at his actual record, he was out there calling the border wall racist. All sorts of different things. What are your thoughts on those places, Florida, Texas?
Yeah, well, we've been keeping a very close eye on Texas and then Florida. You remember Ted Cruz beat Beto by only 3 points back in 2018. The good news is, first, Ted Cruz is a terrific candidate. He's a terrific senator. He's working very hard. He's running like he's 5 points behind, which he should be doing. But the polling data suggests now that Ted Cruz is showing a nice lead in that race. We're keeping an eye on it, but Ted Cruz is going to win the state of Texas. Rick Scott, similarly, he's running a great race. He's a great senator. Florida has shifted more to the right. Look at what happened in 2022. Marco Rubio won his reelect by 17 points. Ron DeSantis won his reelect by 19 points. What's happened in Florida is the center-right folks are fleeing the Northeast, and they're coming down to Florida, not to change Florida, but to join the center-right movement, the Republican movement there in Florida.
Right. So now, assuming Republicans hold both of those, they hold Florida, they hold Texas, you guys pick up West Virginia, then the offense begins, right? Like, so now we're talking about, you go for, by the way, 50-50, and Republicans take the White House. You guys have the Senate right there anyway, right? Like, but to get to 51, where you have it no matter who's in the White House, Montana and Ohio seem to be the next two big ones.
They do, but I think it's a really important point to consider as you look a little longer term between now and 2030. When I first took over chairmanship, I took a look at the 24 map. There's 3 red states that have Democrats up. And we've talked about West Virginia, it's Montana, it's Ohio. In each one of those red states, every single statewide elected official is a Republican, except for Joe Manchin, John Tester, and Sherrod Brown. In each of those 3 states, Trump's going to win West Virginia by 40. He'll win Montana by 20. He's going to win Ohio by about 10. Red. But when you start looking at the out cycles, 2026, how many red states have Democrats up in 26? The answer is 0. That was a sobering moment early in my leadership assignment here at the NRSC. Then I peeked over the hill and looked at 2028. How many red states have Democrats up in the Senate? 0. So it's 3 this cycle. It's 0 in 26. It's 0 in 28. Here's the point. If we reclaim the majority, we likely can hold that enduring majority through the end of the decade. But the sobering thought is if we don't get the majority this cycle, we are likely in the minority the rest of the decade, and that's a frightening thought for the future of this great country.
Right. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So now, looking specifically here at Montana, when you were first elected to office in the House of Representatives, all the other statewide offices were held by Democrats. You kind of led this Republican revolution in this state because, as you mentioned there, here in the state of Montana now, they're all held by Republicans except for John Tester's seat. How'd that happen?
Well, the state has shifted more to the right over time, but I think it's more the Democrats have shifted so far left. The parallels between Montana and, for example, Ohio, that used to be more of a blue collar, used to be a swing state in the Electoral College, if you go back 20, 25 years, Ohio is now a very predictable red state for the presidential and a red state for statewide elected officials. In Montana, when I first ran, in 2012, I ran for an at-large statewide U.S. congressional seat. There was only 1 statewide elected Republican and 7 Democrats. Today, there are 9 major office holders, 8 are Republicans, only John Tester is the last remaining Democrat. I think it's been a combination of finding better candidates that can win these big races, and also just putting out a clearer message around what we stand for. When I ran for the U.S. House in 2012, I had 28 years of experience in the private sector. I was a job creator. My campaign came down to 4 words: more jobs, less government. It's about jobs, yes, higher paying jobs, but also less government. We have a little bit of a libertarian streak out here in Montana. We want the government to stay out of our way of life here in Montana. So I won that seat, and as we kind of watched this go, cycle by cycle, now the governor of Montana, Greg Gianforte, he was my business partner for the last 25 years. We were in the private sector together, now he's the governor. We never had plans to be in politics, but I'm really grateful to see another business guy as our governor, and I have the honor of serving as U.S. Senator.
It seems like that model is something that you're going for around the country. We've seen it work a little bit in other places as well. Obviously, you mentioned you and Governor Gianforte here, but you see it in Wisconsin with Senator Johnson. You see it in, obviously, with President Trump, a business guy before he was elected to office. Senator Hagerty comes to mind in Tennessee. There's plenty of other ones as well. Is that something, if you look across the board at your guys' candidates this year, obviously Tim Sheehy here in Montana, business guy before, also a Navy SEAL veteran, but if you look across the board, Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, Eric Hovde in Wisconsin, in New Mexico, I believe you guys have a business background.
Nella Domenici in New Mexico was the CFO of Dave McCormick's at Bridgewater when he was CEO, another businesswoman who has that background. Well, I think the American people want to see leaders who have experience in the real world, have been successful in the real world of literally signing the front of a paycheck. And so I look at another thread in this particular cycle is not only these business leaders, but also this military background. Tim Sheehy, Naval Academy graduate, 100 combat missions as a Navy SEAL. His wife, also a Marine from the Naval Academy. They were in Afghanistan for 6 years deployed as a married couple, saw each other 45 days. Married by a judge in Kalispell, Montana, because we're the only state that will do a double proxy wedding as they're both in the battlefield in Afghanistan, and then comes back, he's here in Montana and creates a successful business. Dave McCormick, West Point graduate, 82nd Airborne, successful businessman. Sam Brown in Nevada, West Point graduate, great story of heroism. They're nearly killed by a bomb by the Taliban in Afghanistan. You look at Mike Rogers in Michigan, also a veteran, an Army veteran. And I think when we start taking a look at the chaos in the world, the chaos going on in our country, the discipline of someone with a military background is definitely an asset in this election.
So when you pull those things together, again, the common thread of all of these Republican candidates seems to be either or both, a military background or a business background or both. Was that, again, by design here?
Well, really what it was let's find candidates that will advance the conservative cause that can win a primary and a general election. And oh, by the way, it happens to be a common thread here of successful business people and those with military backgrounds oftentimes fit that profile we're looking for.
Here in Montana, as you guys seek to complete this Republican revolution, it's a close race, right? Like if you look at the public polls, it's tied in between Sheehy and Tester. Why is it close? What is it about Tester that keeps him in the game?
They've dropped $30 million of advertising, $30 million in a state that only has 1 million people. Look, we've got 3 times as many cows as we have people in the state of Montana. They're lighting up the airwaves.
It's a great statistic, by the way.
We love that fact.
Yeah.
But look, anytime you pour that much money into personal attacks against a candidate, that starts to have an effect. The second thing is that it's a name ID gap right now. I mean, Jon Tester has been a statewide elected official for 18 years in the Senate. People know Jon Tester. People know his name. As we get closer to the election, you're going to see that I think Sheehy's numbers start to go up a little bit higher because we'll close that name ID gap. I mean, right now, to think about this, there's been $30 million of negative ads dropped on Tim Sheehy, and the race is tied.
Yeah.
Pretty remarkable. It shows you the resilience of Tim Sheehy. We've just got to get his story out, and that's why the funding gap here is unlike anything in the country. The Democrats have a huge advantage here in Montana, and this is where we got to shore up the fundraising side here in Montana, so we just get our message out across the radio, across digital, of course, across TV as well.
Yeah, and I mean, they're trying to destroy Tim Sheehy. I mean, I've seen the attacks across the media. It's so nasty, so personal, going after his military service record, going after his business. I mean, it's just disgusting. What's your advice to him as he fights through this to win? I mean, obviously, you've won some nasty races against Democrats here in Montana. How does he power through this? I
actually had the most expensive race in the history of America on a per vote basis when I ran for my re-election in 20. I ran against a very popular Democrat governor, Steve Bullock. It was a $210 million race in Montana. I was outspent by $50 million. That's like having a $4 billion race in Florida, if you think about it for population normalization. They had all kinds of nasty attacks on my background, my business, and everything else, of course. Anytime you're successful, you have a lot of things to talk about, and there's always going to find one disgruntled employee, this and that, and so forth. My advice to Tim Sheehy is keep talking about the issue set. Keep talking about the contrast. Keep talking about what you stand for to secure the southern border. That we're going to stop this, this Biden economy, the worst economy we've had in my lifetime, 20% plus inflation. Stay true to what you believe in. Paint the contrast. When Montanans see how Jon Tester voted, versus what they're seeing on TV right now from Democrats. When we paint that contrast, you're going to see a lot of voters say, hey, I want to be with President Trump and I want to be with Tim Sheehy. The first thing President Trump says is we need to hire Tim Sheehy and fire John Tester. President Trump needs a senator who will vote with President Trump, not against him every time, like John Tester demonstrated while Trump was president for 4 years.
Okay, let's shift now, Senator, to Ohio. Obviously, we've got in that race another business guy in Bernie Moreno, who ran a number of car dealerships for many years before he got involved in politics. And then you've got on the other side the Democrat candidate, of course, longtime politician, Sherrod Brown. He's been around for 50 years in elected office, decades and decades. Unbelievable. Walk us through the big picture there. What does Bernie need to do to win? What are the major points against Sherrod Brown?
Yeah, well, look, Bernie had a convincing primary victory. Won every one of Ohio's 88 counties. Very impressive victory against two formidable Republicans in that primary. Bernie's got a great story. It's an American success story. A Colombian immigrant, came through legally. Speaks Spanish. I mean, there's a lot of assets that Bernie has as a wonderful, sweet wife, Bridget. But you look at Ohio. Ohio's a state that Trump's going to win by probably 10 points. The Democrat Party has left the working class people of Ohio. These are working class voters that are not showing up at Republican events, but they say, I can't vote for a Democrat anymore because on the core issues of energy, oil, natural gas, coal. Look, the left has gone nuts of trying to really shut down all carbon sources of energy. And that it really hits in the heart of Ohio's economy and the working class and their woke agenda. It just is, it's repulsive by those working class voters in Ohio. Bernie has a strong relationship with President Trump. President Trump will be in Ohio campaigning for Bernie. Sherrod Brown, this is the contrast. I mean, he has opposed everything Trump stood for when Trump was president. 50 years in elective office. I think this is a change election coming up.
Sherrod Brown has repeatedly been on the open border side of immigration policy. I looked it up. He called the border wall stupid. He called the border wall wrong. He also has repeatedly voted with Biden on opening the border, and he voted against Trump repeatedly when Trump was in the White House, and there were a number of different consequential immigration votes. He even voted against impeaching Alejandro Mayorkas, who's the guy who opened up the border for Joe Biden. Do you think Ohio voters will give him a pass on that?
Once Ohio voters know the truth, they know how Sherrod Brown actually votes, Bernie Moreno wins this election. What clouds it at the moment is the fact that the left, their ads are trying to show, there's literally ads showing Sherrod Brown like, I'm fighting to secure the southern border. In fact, I think Bernie Moreno joked the other day, says, by the end of the election, you'll probably see Sherrod Brown endorsing Trump. I mean, it's ridiculous as these Democrats in these red states are running for cover because they know it's the only way they can survive. So once that contrast is painted in Ohio, I think you're going to see with Trump winning by 10 points, you ask yourself, how many Trump Sherrod Brown voters are there going to be when we come to November 5th? That gap is going to close significantly, and that's why I like Bernie Moreno's odds in Ohio.
One of the other things I've seen Sherrod Brown repeatedly doing is he keeps attacking Bernie Moreno over this Lordstown plant, this GM plant in Lordstown. Bernie Moreno, when he was an auto dealer in 2019, was trying to fight to keep the plant. We did a big fact check on it on Breitbart. I'm just shocked that he gets away with these lies. Why do these Democrats get away with lies like this?
Because the mainstream media. There it is. I mean, I'll tell you what, thank God for Breitbart. Thank God for the center-right truth that we need to have spreading across this country so that voters can see what's actually happening. There's so much at stake in this election. It's important. If the truth gets out to the voters, we're going to win. What clouds it is the massive amount of money that the left has right now in this election. They have a lot more money than Republicans. I think there's a misperception that somehow Republicans have the money and Democrats don't. It's the opposite. We are being outspent 3-1 in virtually every one of these Senate races by the Democrats. The second thing, of course, is the mainstream media. This is why it's so important we have the center-right truth that's cutting through the mainstream media so that voters can see what's actually going on here so they can make an informed choice.
And I want to go through all the major races with you. So the moving beyond Ohio and Montana, we've got down in Nevada, obviously, you mentioned Sam Brown, really powerful story. He just won the Republican nomination a couple weeks ago. Most of his body is covered in burns because he was hit by a roadside bomb when he was in Afghanistan. He's told us, I've talked to him about the story. It's really, really incredible story of heroism. He didn't even need to be there that day, right? Like, that was so crazy. He was going to save other people. Do you think that powerful story helps propel him past Jackie Rosen?
So I think Sam's story is one of the best. We've got some great stories from our candidates as they tell the story of American heroism. Sam's is hard to beat. I mean, here's a guy who was blown up by the Taliban in Afghanistan, shipped over in a mummy wrapping, severely burned. As you know, if you see Sam Brown, you know he was hurt. His face is visibly scarred from the burns from the Taliban. Shipped to a burn unit in San Antonio with the U.S. Army. And again, West Point graduate, American hero, in the burn unit, fighting for his life, wrapped in mummy bandages with a feeding tube in his mouth. And one of the nurses and dietitians there was named Amy, and she's fighting to save his life. Amy is now his wife. Their first date, after he started to recover, was to a Texas rodeo. And now it's Captain Sam as well as Captain Amy Brown. And the two of them are running together. They're both American heroes. That story is very compelling. And when you look at Nevada, it was the tightest race in 2022. If you remember that Senate race, Adam Laxalt
I was there on election.
He lost by 8,000 votes on a night when Governor Lombardo, Joe Lombardo, picked up a governor seat for the Republicans. The only Republican governor pickup in the 22 election was in Nevada. And Nevada's gotten a little more Republican since the 22 election. We kind of taken a look at voter registration and so forth. But importantly, Trump will be at the top of the ticket. And by the way, that Trump rally that he had in Las Vegas recently when he talked about no taxes on tips, genius.
110-degree heat, and the place was packed.
Stroke of genius, though, to propose that when I'm elected president, we're going to eliminate taxes on tips. You think about the working class struggling under the Biden economy, struggling with 20% inflation. Well, think about a 20% tip. Guess what? That's kind of helps offset the impact of Joe Biden's economy, and it brings more people into the workforce. Incentivizing people to work because we're not going to tax tips. Incentivizing people to even do a better job in serving in a service economy like Las Vegas. You think about those working in the casinos, the cab drivers, the gig economy, waiters and waitresses. Look, that was a really great move, not only for Nevada, but for the entire country to really bring the working class. You know, we've said the Republicans are now the party of the working class. The Democrats are the elite, educated wine sippers. We become the beer drinking party of the hardworking men and women in this country.
By the way, I have that. That's a question I wanted to ask you later, but since you brought up the tips thing, I wanted to ask you, let's say Republicans take the Senate, President Trump takes the White House. Is that something you think Senate Republicans, House Republicans would back President Trump on, is the no taxes on tips thing?
I'm introducing the bill.
You're introducing
I'm
the
on
bill.
the finance. I'm on the finance committee. The finance committee has jurisdiction over taxes. And so, Newt Gingrich advises President Trump, and President Trump, of course, and Newt and I talk frequently. And Newt said, Steve, you should introduce that bill. I said, I was planning to. So I'm introducing that bill of no taxes on tips. So we basically have got a live round, as we say, ready to fire. Start talking about it now so we're ready to go here when Trump gets elected.
So, and President Trump says everybody should sign their checks when they go to a restaurant with the vote for Trump for no taxes.
So my wife sent me a picture. They've got a little stamp now that people keep in their pockets. It says vote Trump, no taxes on tips, and they're stamping their receipt each time they're going out to eat or anywhere they go.
You got to make these stamps and get them out to everybody.
Making stamps great again. It's awesome.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so Senator, back to the Nevada Senate race. I see Jackie Rosen out there. She's using some pretty, it seems like blast from the past tired Democrat talking points.
Yeah.
She keeps accusing Republicans of a war on women. I think that was from 2012. I don't know.
Well, look, you want to talk about war on women? Go talk to Sam Brown's wife, Amy. Talk all you want about the war on women. They are American war heroes that have defended our country, and Amy saved her now husband's life. But that race right now, we're seeing polls, it's margin of error. Tied race, down a couple points. That race is very tight. And President Trump will be spending time in Nevada, more time than he already has, because it's an important state for President Trump. I like our odds in Nevada.
Okay, so now let's move to Arizona. Arizona, where the Republican nominee is very likely to be, though the primary hasn't happened yet, it's very likely to be Kari Lake. She's going to face off against Ruben Gallego. This is one of those states where one of these senators is retiring. That's Harrison Sinema. Talk to us about the stakes in Arizona. Do you view this as a top race? Is Kari Lake going to win this thing in November?
Yeah, very much a top race. Look, Arizona's a border state. Second, Ruben Gallego is the most liberal Senate candidate of any candidate we have in our top 10 races. He is way out there on the left side of the spectrum. What Kari Lake needs to do to win that race is just paint the contrast. Gallego is far, far left. Kari Lake is well known in Arizona. Our polling shows that as we've seen polls Kari up 1, down 2. She's one of the most talented Senate candidates we have. I mean, she was a news anchor. She's very good on TV, very articulate. She's passionate. And she knows the key to winning in Arizona is make this race about Ruben Gallego. Just make sure that Arizona understand how far left. Remember, it wasn't long ago we had a Republican governor and 2 Republican senators in the state of Arizona. Gallego is way left of where the center of Arizona is.
Right, and so in the case of Gallego, I mean, in particular, I mean, he's got a laundry list of problems. I was looking into his background. I didn't even know any of this stuff. He worked for this bank that was ripping off immigrants. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there to pull at, I think, for Kari Lake.
Well, as we look at the opposition research files, Gallego's is the
pretty thick.
It's like
a big binder.
So
yeah.
Again, the task here in the next 4 months, once the folks in Arizona, they know Kari Lake pretty well because she ran for governor and narrowly lost. They don't know Ruben Gallego because he's a congressman in 1 district. Once the folks in Arizona understand who Gallego is, how he has voted, what he has said, they're going to shake their heads and say he's way too left for our state.
Okay, let's move to Pennsylvania. I know we're bouncing around the country quite a bit here, but Pennsylvania, obviously we've got Dave McCormick. We talked about him a minute ago. He's running against Bob Casey, who's been around again for forever. But I remember Bob Casey, when he was running for the first time, was out there saying that if you vote a certain percentage with the president of your own party, then you need to go. This is when he was running against Senator Santorum. He's voting way higher percentage than Santorum with Biden than Santorum was with Bush. Walk us through your views on the Pennsylvania race.
Sure. Well, again, when you look at these incumbent Democrat senators, you should look at their voting record with Biden, but also their voting record against Trump, because Trump was president for 4 years while they were also in the United States Senate. So you look at Bob Casey, he voted against every major consequential vote for President Trump. He was no on every Supreme Court justice. He voted to impeach Trump twice. So that contrast under Trump is very important, how he was an obstacle to Trump's agenda. But then you start looking at how he's voted with Biden. Look, the energy economy in Pennsylvania is very important. Think about what's going on with natural gas there. And Bob Casey, while he comes across as a nice guy, he is a nice guy. He's not a moderate voter. He's voting in sync with all those radical far left, I call it the green hallucination. They want to eliminate carbon-based fuel, eliminate oil, eliminate gas, eliminate coal, and replace it with this green hallucination.
Casey's basically there because of his dad, right? His dad was a really popular governor in Pennsylvania, but his dad was a moderate Democrat, right? He was one of the most vocal anti-abortion Democrats. Bob Casey of today, no, not so much.
So I think you look at these Democrat senators, like a John Tester, like a Sherrod Brown, like a Bob Casey. They have a moderate image. They come across as moderate. There's an old saying that people sometimes vote with their eyes. They can look moderate. There's nothing moderate about their voting record. They're just lockstep with the far left. And that's what I think is going to be most important for voters, because it doesn't matter if you're a nice guy. It doesn't matter if you appear moderate. What matters is how you vote. Make sure the voters see their voting records. And that's going to be very clear in a state like, of course, Montana, like Ohio, and a state like Pennsylvania. But one thing about Pennsylvania I need to point out, what's different about this cycle and in 2022 is Dave McCormick didn't have a primary. He is a great candidate, a great business background, West Point grad, 82nd Airborne, but he was unopposed in the primary. The state party endorsed him, unheard of. We cleared the primary. There were some candidates thinking about primarying Dave McCormick, working with Dave, working with President Trump, working with our teams. We cleared that. And that really allows him to come out of a primary without any battle scars, to beat Bob Casey in November.
Similar type of a thing, Senator, in Wisconsin. You've got a business guy, Eric Hovde is the Republican nominee. You've got a longtime career politician, and Tammy Baldwin, who's the Democrat incumbent senator. Walk us through your views there.
Yeah, first of all, you're going to hear a repeated theme, but Eric Hovde, very successful businessman, and he cleared a primary, no primary opposition. That's really important. And when we go after these incumbent Democrat senators, we want to minimize, collateral damage of, I call it, the red-on-red fighting in a primary. Wisconsin is one of these 50-50 states. It's a state that Ron Johnson won really by 1 point. It'd be the narrowest outcomes in the presidential elections. Eric Hovde is so Wisconsin. He's got a little bit of that Wisconsin accent with his business background. And he is just a passionate campaigner. He truly enjoys the retail politics of a campaign. He's a people person, loves getting out there. And we're seeing that race narrow as we speak in Wisconsin. People don't really know Tammy Baldwin that well. And Eric Hovde is putting himself in a position where he's going to make that race competitive and has a chance to win.
So now another big race, Michigan. You mentioned this before. We've got Mike Rogers as the Republican nominee. Lissa Slotkin is the Democrat candidate because their current senator is retiring. She's a congresswoman. Your thoughts on that race?
Well, first you start off, when you think about Michigan, it's an open seat. Senator Stabenow announced her retirement. So anytime there's an open seat, there's easier opportunity to pick up a seat when a Democrat retires like that. Mike Rogers is exactly the kind of candidate that can win the state of Michigan. A former House member, former chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the House. I served with Mike Rogers briefly. We overlapped for 2 years. When I came in, he was just on his way out. But he had a career with the FBI. He's also an Army veteran, a business guy. And that race right now is tied. It's a 40-40 race right now in Michigan. That's what we call a resource race because nobody really knows who Slotkin is. The state really doesn't know who Mike Rogers is yet. It's a 40-40 race. It's going to be a matter of resources going in there to win it. But assuming we continue to see strength with Trump to the election, which I think we will, I think Trump has a really good shot to win Michigan. That will bode well, certainly, for Mike Rogers.
Right. Okay. So now another big state, Virginia. We just saw the Republicans nominate Hung Kao. Very powerful story that he's got for the U.S. Senate. He's running against Tim Kaine, again, another longtime career politician. Talk to us about Virginia.
Well, we just saw polling in Virginia that showed Biden and Trump tied in a blue state. Of course, Glenn Youngkin wins the governor's race, a Republican governor. You go back to 2014, that was one of the sleeper races that we nearly picked up a Senate seat against Mark Warner back in 2014. It's one of these races everybody woke up and said, oh, if we just spent a little more time and money in Virginia, we might have picked up that Senate race. So that's a race we're keeping an eye on. Hung Kao's got a great story, once again. Naval Academy grad, did some special operations demolition work with the Navy. There's a strong Vietnamese population, voting population there, and certainly in the northern suburbs in Virginia. That makes this race with Hung Kao as an attractive candidate with an attractive background could be very competitive.
Beyond those, and this will be the last one on specific races, I know we've got a lot to go through here, and if I were the Democrats, I'd be worried because these are all Democrat-held seats right now that we're talking about for the most part. But beyond those, we mentioned earlier New Mexico. There's a possibility in New Jersey. There's a possibility in Maryland even. We're seeing former Governor Hogan's running a strong campaign there. I mean, it does seem as though if I were the Democrats, I'd be pretty worried looking at this map right now.
Well, look, when Larry Hogan got in that race, one of the CNN contributors said, this is Chuck Schumer's worst nightmare. I mean, Larry Hogan, twice elected statewide Republican governor in a race against a very undefined candidate in Brooks. So I think Maryland's also a race that we're going to keep a very close eye on. That race is very tight as we speak, and I think that's a state that we have a chance to pick up a Republican seat in a Democrat state. Keep in mind, if you look at the last two presidential elections where Trump's been on the ballot, 16 and 20, in 68 of the 69 Senate races that were up in 16 and 20, whoever won the presidency also won the Senate in terms of that party. So a state that Trump wins, our Senate candidate won that in 16 as well as 20. If Biden won the state, the Senate Democrat won it in 16 and 20. 68 of 69 times. The only exception to that was Susan Collins in Maine, where Biden won the state of Maine, Susan Collins kept the Republican seat. So when you start looking at 2024 and kind of macro trends, as we get close to Election Day, as President Trump continues to strengthen his leads, it becomes increasingly difficult for the Democrats to outpace that, and it'll be an advantage certainly for our Republican Senate candidates.
And that kind of brings us all full circle here, is that seems like this was the thing that you set out to do as the NRSC chairman from the very get-go in this cycle, to harness that alliance, if you will, between Senate Republicans and President Trump, and to really strengthen that. I mean, you guys are leaning in on it. It kind of happened by accident almost in 2016, whereas this time it's by design.
Well, Nick Saban said something that I'll never forget. He says, if you want to keep everybody happy, don't be a leader. Go sell ice cream. Look, I'm not in the job to keep everybody happy. I'm in the job to lead, to save this country by winning a Republican majority in the United States Senate. That's working with President Trump early on to get behind candidates that can win the primary and then win the general election. And now 4 months out, as we're looking at this next election, President Trump and myself, there's virtually zero separation between, on these candidates. We are aligned from top to bottom on these Senate races. Very important, because it's not just about winning now, but also governing with President Trump to make sure we can advance his agenda when he's elected.
Right, and so now it does seem too as though the Senate Republican candidates and Trump both bring different voters to the table as well. So you guys help each other win, right? Like, if anything, this alliance that we're talking about here, this is going to help Trump get over the hump and get to 270 or more electoral votes. It's going to help Republicans get to 51 or more Senate seats.
Look, I've talked frequently with President Trump, and we're both just grateful that we're going to have candidates that President Trump is excited about standing on the stage. When he goes out to Las Vegas again, to have Sam Brown and Amy Brown standing with him on the stage. He was just in Pennsylvania and have Dave McCormick standing with him on the stage. If he comes through Montana, have Tim Sheehy standing with him on the stage. In Ohio, have Bernie Moreno standing with him on the stage. In Michigan, have Mike Rogers with him. In Wisconsin, Eric Hovde. In Arizona, Kerry Lake. Look, it is 1 + 1 = 3. This is what we want to do here by having these great Senate candidates working alongside President Trump.